Warning. This show contains adult political themes and language. Liberals and little children should cover their ears.
Welcome to Liberty Never Sleeps, where negativity never sounded so good. Now here's your host, Thomas Purcell.
Welcome to Liberty Never Sleeps. I'm your host, Tom Purcell. If you'd like to reach me during the show, you can tweet me at LotusTom. Email me at tom@libertyneversleeps.com. That's our website. Or join us on Facebook at Liberty Never Sleeps on Facebook.com. Joining me today is Tom Laskowski. Happy Columbus Day, Laz.
Hey, right back at you, T. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a holiday. It's a federal holiday, I think. Although they're trying to rename it as what? Indigenous Peoples Day?
Is that what they're trying to do?
Is that what that's what they're trying to do? I don't know why we should celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. I don't understand that. If you want to say, well, I don't want to celebrate Columbus because he executed Native Americans when he arrived here,
right,
or gave them syphilis, or whatever you want to, point out, that's fine. I understand that. I understand why somebody who is a Native American might be upset about Columbus arriving. I don't understand the whole thing, Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, because what did the indigenous people do for America other than bitch and complain about the whole place? I mean, if it wasn't for Columbus, we'd all be speaking German in teepees.
German in teepees.
Well, think about it. I wrote an article on this.
Okay.
What did Christopher Columbus do?
Well, he killed a lot of Indians, evidently.
He sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Okay, the celebration of Columbus Day is not because he discovered, quote unquote, America. America was on maps and charts in 1492 as well. Okay,
right.
They knew that there were lands to the west. What they didn't know was what was there, whether the passage to India could be accomplished. There were a lot of things they didn't know. They really had not capitalized the area. And the general feeling in Europe was, so what? There's a bunch of islands out there. There's some land out there. What good is it? Christopher Columbus went, he was an Italian, went to the Italian leaders and said, I need money for a voyage there. I think that we can capitalize on it. I think that there's probably a trade route by going west, that those lands over there are islands, and we could sail around them and get to the west much easier than the east, because if we travel to the east, we've got to cross land that is controlled by essentially Muslims and very hostile to move spices across land. So let's move them across west. Italian leaders said, nah, there's nothing there. There's no way. It wouldn't matter if the world was round and you could get there by sea. It just is not cost effective. It's not. So he went to the Spanish leaders, and the Spain said, yeah, we'll fund a trip. And so he went, and he sailed up and down the coast, couldn't find a passage, and he settled, and he claimed those lands for Spain in the name of Spain, as was required, because they said, we'll give you the money, but it's got to be Spanish land you claim for. He's okay. The big thing that Columbus, and the reason why we celebrate Columbus Day, is not for his discovery, quote unquote, of the New World. It's for his capitalization and making the lands there valuable to Europeans, which is what they did. They eventually established trade routes with Native Americans as well as exterminated some of them. I'm not going to deny that.
Right.
But he was a man of 1492, not a man of 2092. Okay? The Native Americans that were here, the Aztecs and the Incans, were just as violent and just as slanderous and just as butchering as the Europeans were. That was that was where humankind was in 1492. They were cannibalistic rituals. There were blood rituals. There's strong evidence that the Native Americans were just as violent as the European culture. So I don't want to hear how Columbus exterminated the Indians, because he didn't.
And the slave trade was in full bloom then too. It wasn't like Columbus. It's not like he was doing anything out of the ordinary.
This is where human beings, as a species, were in 1492.
Right.
You can't apply 2012 population standards.
Well, of course, but we do. They try. They try to say, well, this is the way it is. But, it wasn't like that way back there. And here's another aspect of Columbus Day. Columbus Day as we know it in the United States was invented by the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal services organization back in the 1930s. They were looking for a Catholic hero as a role model their kids could look up to. So in 1934, a result of lobbying from the Knights of Columbus and Congress, and President Franklin Roosevelt signed Columbus Day into law as a federal holiday to honor his courageous explorer.
It was a political creation.
Yes.
In its nature. But I want to point out, I'm tired of hearing about how Columbus was like the harbinger of evil, because he wasn't. Not in the sense, because what would have happened had Columbus not been able to raise the money and the New World was not capitalized? There would be no Jamestown colony if it wasn't Columbus. The English would not have gone 200 years later. They would have not valued the New World. There would have been no Plymouth colony if there was no Jamestown. In fact, there would be no United States of America, probably, if there was not for Christopher Columbus. Okay? And if there was no United States of America, then the Germans in World War II, certainly, maybe World War I, would have overrun the world. And the Native Americans would have been wiped out by Nazism. So don't tell me how the Native Americans suffered terribly because of Christopher Columbus. If it wasn't for Christopher Columbus, America would not exist. And Native Americans, as changed people as they were by the expansion of the American West, would have certainly fared much worse under European cultures. As a matter of fact, most of the Native American misery comes from the actions of the Spanish and French governments, not the actions of the American colonists. Most of the Native Americans were wiped out by the Spanish and the French colonization efforts. So please, they fared much better than they would have had the Germans under Nazism eventually landed on the shores of the New World and conquered it. They would have been wiped out. There would have been no mechanization. You got to understand, Native Americans, both the Aztecs and the Incans, were not industrialized nations like they were of Europe. They were largely a hunting and gathering.
Right.
They would not have advanced as quickly as the European cultures did. And they would have never discovered the secrets of industrialization, of steel and ore and mining. That would not have come from the Native American tribes of 1492, much less the Native American tribes of 1772. It just wouldn't have happened. And eventually, the European cultures would have come over, and they would have been much more hostile to the Native Americans. And that's why we should celebrate Columbus Day. In fact, that's why the indigenous peoples, quote unquote, as they like to be called now apparently, should be celebrating Columbus too. Because if it wasn't for the discovery of the free countries of America, none of this would exist today. In fact, they wouldn't even be able to complain, the leftists, about European colonization, because the Nazis would make it a war crime and there'd be no freedom of speech. So don't tell me that Christopher Columbus was such a bad guy. Christopher Columbus was a genius because he knew the value of the lands west of Europe and capitalized on it, established trade routes and established capitalization and capitalism in general. This is not an attack on Columbus, on Christopher Columbus. It's an attack on capitalism. Don't let them lie to you.
Okay.
It's a bunch of horse poop.
Well, but Columbus rightfully so deserves some of the heat that he's getting because what he did to the people in the Bahamas, those people who were friendly and giving and hospitable and worked hard and honest and helped him save his crew and helped him save all his cargo, and if you asked them for anything, they would do it. They didn't want. There were two tribes. The Arawaks were the one tribe, and they didn't even have weapons, Tom. So for Christopher Columbus, yeah, obviously, he's been put up in a pulpit and put up in a pedestal and made to look like he was this great guy, but he was a man of his times. Obviously,
Right.
we understand that.
You
Okay,
can't-
but
you
he was
can't
no
say-
saint. He was no saint.
Well, nobody was at that period of time. It was the nature of humans as a species to be
Right.
nasty to each other. They're
Right.
naturally and those that were friendly to Columbus and eventually died as a result of it. I got to tell you, that's evolution, Darwinism. The fittest should survive. And frankly, there was no way you can apply our standards of today to peoples of then. It's not possible. You're talking about over 500 years difference in cultures and beliefs and in religious beliefs. And people say, well, it was Christians. Christians are just as violent as Muslims. Yeah, 500 years ago,
Right.
the Muslims haven't evolved. They're still slaughtering and beheading people. We
Right.
don't. We've evolved as a culture, as a civilization, as a people. The peoples of the West and industrialization and capitalism brought all of that. So it's ridiculous to say, well, that shows that Christians are just as violent as Muslims. Yeah, 500 years ago we were, and we've evolved since then. And it's stupid, absolutely idiotic, to apply our standards of today to the peoples of then. It's ridiculous. That's like saying that Muslims should behead people because 500 years ago they did. It's
Right.
ridiculous.
Which is what's happening now.
You can't apply that sort of standard to a modern culture. Now, Islamic extremism tries to do that.
Right.
Islamic extremism says, listen, all this stuff that we've learned over the last 500 or 1,000 years, all of this industrialization, all of these modern understandings about treating people equal, that's a bunch of horse poop. You should go back to slaughtering people who don't believe what you do.
Right.
It's the Muslims and that theory and that school of thought that leads to other things, such as Nazism or what happened with Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Columbus really didn't kill all those people.
Oh, yeah.
That would be as bad as
Yeah.
saying the Holocaust didn't exist. Of course it did.
Yeah.
But you can't say that Columbus was any different than anyone else of his times. If he was, then you would have an argument. If European culture in 1492, okay, because you got to remember, in Europe in 1492 there were things such as the Inquisition and things like that. If you said that Christopher Columbus was acting in extreme behavior and different from the European cultures of 1490, I would say then you have a case. If when he got back to Spain and said, this is what I did and this is, how it went down, and they publicly executed him as a murderer, then I would say, yeah, you got a good case. But it wasn't.
Right.
And let's look at the end result here. Not that I'm saying that the end justifies the means, but what is the historical context? What was the end result of Columbus's discovery of the quote-unquote discovery? I hate using that word because he really didn't discover it.
No.
This discovery of the New World. I should say the capitalization of the New World. The result was a free people, was the light of America, which has brought freedom and enlightenment to the world. That was the end result.
Right.
So, yeah, we should be celebrating Christopher Columbus. Hell, we're not celebrating the guy enough. Thank God he discovered America. Thank God he capitalized. Otherwise, we wouldn't be free to do this show today. We'd
Right.
still be living under the monarchs of Spain and England and France. Nazism probably would have run roughshod over them, because it did if it wasn't for America. Or maybe communism. Maybe the communists would have overrun Europe and in turn would have come to America instead. It's a good thing that we did. We have to start thinking in historical context. It would be like, let's say there were people living on Mars, just as an example. And some guy here went to Mars, and because him being from Earth brought bacteria, brought diseases, and helped to exterminate the Martians inadvertently, let's say, using our standards of today.
Right.
but established a human colony there. And then down here on this planet was wiped out by a nuclear war. But the Martian colony survived. You would be thankful that he did, because the human beings as a species, would survive. That's the value of Columbus. That's what he did. By establishing European and industrialization in the New World, he allowed the species to survive as a free people. That is very important, and that should be celebrated. You know, the liberals are funny. They talk about all the wonders of living a native life, and there are certain things to a simpler life that are very true. But think about all the advantages of capitalism and industrialization and what that's brought us. It's brought us a longer lifespan, a more pleasant lifespan, when we don't have to grub every day in the ground for our food. We have to work less hours. I mean, they talk about 40-hour work week like it's something horrible. I got news for you. If we were still living in a Native American culture, you'd be working 24 hours a day. That's how that works. That's what you have to do to survive. It's funny how they say all these things while tweeting it out on a $300 iPod. And then they don't realize, well, everything about you, everything that you are doing, you have to thank capitalism to thank. This is a celebratory day of capitalism. And let me say here now first, maybe they should rename it. Not to Indigenous Peoples Day, who did nothing to expand America. Let's talk about Capitalism Day. Christopher Columbus Day is a day where we celebrate capitalism. Hell, we got enough days to celebrate everything else. We got Labor Day, which celebrates socialism. Now we got Indigenous Peoples Day, which celebrates living in a mud hut in on a plain on a prairie. Let's have Columbus Day be renamed Capitalism Day. That's what we should name it. And let's celebrate all the wonderful things capitalism brought us, because we take it for granted every day. Everything from our electric lights to our dishwashers and toasters to our iPods, where you send me hate mail.
To our computers.
I can't, it's just astonishing how ignorant the left wing is. We're going to talk about that later in the show, too, about Gwyneth Paltrow and her ignorance. I'm so sick of all this I hate capitalism and all this I hate America stuff while they live and breathe under the blankets of safety of freedoms that has been provided by capitalism. You know?
Right.
What was it you said somebody at work was talking about how there's no capitalism in the Constitution? What is he talking about? The entire Constitution is based on the rights of individual freedoms, and you can't have that without capitalism. Capitalism is the emblem of individual freedoms.
Well, the problem goes deeper than him not getting that. I'm sure he's not a dumb individual, but it just seems to me like too many people on the left and are progressive Democrats who lean towards socialism. That's the part that scares me.
Well, what happens is they have no understanding of it and no historical context, because they go around reading all this horse poop about Christopher Columbus and believing it. You know, I was checking for news stories this morning before the show started, and I was over on the NBC thread, and NBC was saying, well, is Christopher Columbus a good guy or is he not a good guy, right? And they studied his life. And you should see all the comments of all the ignorant assholes who say Christopher Columbus wiped out American Indians. He never even got to North America. And Christopher Columbus was awful, and Christopher Columbus did all this stuff. You know what? It turns out they have no understanding of Christopher Columbus or the history behind it or what exactly Columbus did. They were all talking about, well, Christopher Columbus didn't discover the New World. Christopher Columbus, other explorers discovered the world. Yeah, but the other discoverers came to the New World and went back home. Didn't do shit. They planted a flag or threw some rocks in a circle and said, oh, wow, there's land here. And then went home and never did anything about it. The New World was actually technically discovered a couple hundred years earlier by Leif Erikson,
right,
and some nomadic peoples, the Vikings. They didn't do anything. You know why? Because there was nothing here to kill and loot. And Christopher Columbus saw the value of basically a virgin territory.
Well, he raped it pretty well.
He did.
He
That
did,
was
but
the
like I said, but
danger of
exactly,
1492.
exactly. That's the point.
That's what they did.
There's
But
no arguing what he did, and there's
there
no
were
arguing
many
the
others.
results.
As people developed, as European culture developed into a more civilized society
Mm-hmm.
by 1600s, in other words, a couple hundred years later. And people
Right.
forget that. You know, they put Christopher Columbus in the same time frame as the Plymouth colonists, and it's so ridiculous.
Right.
A couple hundred years go by of them slowly becoming more civilized and more aware of this. It's called the Restoration and Renaissance, when mankind begins to realize the value of life and begins to stop pillaging and looting everybody.
Right.
They discover this and start to do what? Colonize it. And when they came to the New World, they tried to establish friendly relations with many of the tribes. That is historically true. Look it up, folks. And in some cases, the native tribes were hostile. It's natural. They were still more backward than the European people.
Right.
And what happened was there was naturally conflicts with that. The original intent of the colonists when they came to New World was establish relations with the native tribes. The peoples of 1650 were not the peoples of 1492 any more than the peoples of 1650 were the same people of 1850 or 1950. Peoples changed, morals changed, ideas of what is right and what is wrong change. So it's just the ignorance that I saw in some of those posts about what Christopher Columbus did I thought should be addressed on this show. Christopher Columbus, despite his many faults, had one redeeming value. He understood the value of freedom and capitalism, and he understood the value of it, and therefore he established or tried to establish it in the New World. Was he a good guy? Because in retrospect, as compared to his contemporaries today, of course not. But you're applying those standards to a people that were 500 years backward from us. And it was not something specific to Columbus. It was something that society was like. And I dare say the Incans and the Aztecs today, who are the modern-day Peruvians and Chileans who still live as a people, are still friggin' backward. If you want to go there, take a look around. Does it look like Europe? While Europe was building the Sistine Chapel, these guys were stacking pebbles. So please, put some historical context into the value of Columbus. We've got to go to commercial break.